Welcome back, everyone, to today's Startup Genome event. Thank you very much for joining this session right here. We're coming together to celebrate the launch of Startup Genome's first ever life sciences edition of our annual Global Startup Ecosystem Report. Our team has been working for over a year to develop a specific methodology with which we're looking at life sciences startup ecosystems, with which we're ranking their performance and also giving specific insights into factors such as knowledge creation. And we're very happy to release that report today. And we also have today's panel and our distinguished guests in order to talk about some of the key findings and some of the trends that they're seeing in their ecosystem today. Just to mention a few points, it's quite fascinating to see that we're already counting about 108 life sciences unicorns globally. We've seen that in 2020, the total amount of Series B and plus investment has grown to over 18 billion USD, which is almost double the amount compared to 2019. And many other fascinating statistics and insights are to be found in the report. Feel free to check it out on startupgenome.com. Without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce today's guests. We have Dr. Kate Kornick, the CEO of LaunchVic, Victoria's innovation agency. We have Christoph Klöpper, the CEO of Basel Area Business and Innovation. And we have Harry Glorikian, general partner at Scientia Ventures based out of Boston. Kate, do you want to say a few words to introduce yourself?
Hi, well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here today. As you mentioned, I'm the CEO of LaunchVic, which is the Victorian government startup agency here in Melbourne, Australia. We are an emerging ecosystem. We've been growing at quite a rapid rate over the last few years. And one of the strengths that is emerging in our ecosystem is medtech. So we're really delighted to see Melbourne featuring quite prominently in the report, and very interested in the discussion today and look forward to sharing some of the things that we've been doing in Down Under.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining us today, Kate. Christoph, would you like to briefly introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure, absolutely. Big thank you also from my side to be able to be here on this panel. This is very, very interesting for me too. I'm heading Basel Area Business and Innovation, and we are the economic promotion agency for the Greater Basel area. That's a region in Switzerland. Actually, it's a life sciences hotspot here in Switzerland. You see behind me in the screen one of the headquarters of Novartis, one of the two companies of the two top 5 pharmaceutical companies here in Basel. So it is really a life sciences cluster we have here, and with a growing number of startups here too. And that's, I think, why this panel is also so interesting for us.
Thank you so much, Christoph. Harry, over to you.
So, hi, I'm Harry Glorikian. Thank you so much for having me on this discussion. I'm a general partner at Scientia Ventures and happy to participate.
Thank you so much, Harry. And Harry, perhaps you could kick us off. It was very fascinating to read your take on how technology has been transforming the life sciences industry, for example, in healthcare. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you've seen, what you're observing?
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching for quite a long time about how technology, where data and biology have been intersecting more and more over time, but technology has played a much larger role of being able to shift care or how we can get data or analyze data in different ways. And COVID-19 has just accelerated that shift. There are many things that pre-COVID I would have said, oh, that'll take about another 5 to 7 years. And now I'm looking at it going, okay, it's here, or it's happening right now. And so some startups that would have taken a lot longer have catapulted to the forefront because, take for instance, maybe just telemedicine or certain wearable technology. Physicians are saying, I need this right now. Or if I'm going to run a clinical trial, how do I get to that patient, in the wild? Because I can't stop doing what I'm doing. So we've seen a big shift, and people always ask how, will this last? And I say the durability of COVID is been so much that I think it's going to be hard for anybody to try to go back to the way that it was exactly.
Absolutely agreed. And I wonder, Kate, for example, you in Victoria, you mentioned that you see impressive trajectory in medtech, for example. Were there any specific trends you've been observing in your ecosystem or globally?
So certainly in Victoria's ecosystem, the impact of COVID was in many ways a positive thing. And I know that's a very challenging thing to say because there are a number of startups that have struggled. But the reality is the successful startups have become way more successful, way more quickly, just as Harry was saying. I think we've continued to see the rise of medtech, and that's off the back of Melbourne being a very strong research cluster. We've got great strengths around life sciences, in particular brain science, cancer research, immunology. We've got a number of very well globally renowned research institutes, and we're starting to see a trickle effect of commercialization coming from that and continued growth in the sector. At a macro level, we actually saw almost 11% jobs growth in the startup sector last year, which was quite phenomenal given what was going on in the rest of the economy. And it just shows how important startups are to our future economies. And that's something that we've been espousing for some time. I know Startup Genome's been espousing that. And I think, the COVID has just shone a light on that, and we're lucky that we've continued to grow. We've continued to see successful startups, including in medtech and biotech.
And how would you describe LaunchVic's particular role? I mean, were there any specific actions you've taken to sustain the growth and sustain the impact of the cluster in recent months?
So we've been going for 5 years, and we've been a facilitator of the ecosystem. So we've been funding programs to really drive the variety of metrics that Startup Genome measures, but particularly supporting startups to grow and making sure that they've got the networks, connections, and access to capital. I think there's a couple of things that we've done specifically in medtech. One was to really proliferate the number of programs that support medtech startups, recognizing we're a small country with 25 million people. You're not going to grow a global startup in Australia. You have to be able to understand the rest of the world. And in medtech, that necessarily means understanding regulatory regimes internationally, whether that's the US, Europe, Asia, etc. So we've put in place programs to support startups to get the access to the knowledge they need to help grow, but particularly around the regulatory regimes. The other thing which I'm happy to talk about more is what we've done with investment landscape, and particularly supporting early stage investments, so angel investments and Series A. Angel investments we've implemented during COVID, and that's been very successful. We're in the process of rolling out a fund of funds to support a proliferation of the VC sector, and particularly focused on early stage. And we're in the midst of rolling that out. So that's a watch this space, but it's a very exciting project.
Perfect, thank you. And are there any specific case studies or success stories that stood out for you in medtech, for example, coming out of the Melbourne ecosystem during the last couple of months?
I think to the companies that are doing exceptionally well and have gone incredibly quickly and grown incredibly quickly are the ones that are telehealth related, as Harry was saying. So the ones that have been here right now in market, ready to go. So we've got a company, Hot Docs, which is an online booking system, and you can book your COVID jab through Hot Docs and go off to see your physician that way. You can go see have a telepresence meeting through the system. So that's a really, a small startup that has grown prolifically through this period. But, we also have a lot of pharmaceutical companies that have continued to grow in medtech devices, and perhaps not so COVID specific, but nevertheless are getting the support they need to grow, undertake clinical trials and come to market. So the real growth has been the ones that can solve the real problems that governments are facing right now. But more broadly, we're seeing growth in almost every part of the startup sector, particularly medtech and biotech.
Yeah, fantastic. Christoph, would love to hear from you. Would love to hear from Basel, which indeed is a real powerhouse in life sciences. When I read some of these statistics, it was quite fascinating. I believe life sciences represents about 1/3 of the total added value in the region. Would love to hear from you. What are some of the latest trends that you've been seeing in your ecosystem? Is there anything specific that stood out to you during the pandemic?
I mean, first of all, during the pandemic, the life sciences industry did in the end quite well. I think they did also a great job. I think in the end for us patients, I mean, bringing a vaccine to the market so quickly, I think this is a cool story. And in the end, we also see many startup stories in there, the BioNTech story, the Moderna story from Boston. I think this, at least for me, was cool to see that startups were in the end the agile part of the industry, but the large players could then take it up and bring a lot of value to the patient in the end, or not the patient, but the person who needed a vaccination now. And for us as a cluster, first, we really had to cope with this. I mean, there was a much higher demand for people because, I mean, Roche was doing the tests. Moderna has Lonza as its partner for production. So Lonza has its headquarters also here in Basel. So they hired a lot of people. And then I think we almost had the same problem we heard of from Harry about Boston, that it was hard to get the people into the startups if they're also the big companies offering quite good salaries. So that was probably a bit of a luxury problem for an economic region, but not for the startups, of course. And then on the startup side, I was surprised that I really feared that funding would go down. People get more risk averse. You all know Europe is probably not the most risk-taking society we have here. So we feared it could get even worse. And that was not the case, because I think people realize that there's so much value. And this value can create good revenues, be it in digital medicine, but also in traditional biotechs like RNA medicines, right? We've seen them in research for such a long time. And now suddenly we see, oh, there's a lot of value in the end in the market. And then we saw that suddenly even those companies were able to raise quite large rounds of financing during the pandemic. And all the arguments we had before, oh, it needs a lot of face-to-face meetings. I need to meet the people from Boston, for instance, before I get an investment. This wasn't the case anymore. The video was enough. And I think this made life more efficient even in the startup community.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that this is also a lesson learned perhaps from the pandemic, that global collaboration can benefit at greater pace the global life sciences development? You mentioned the vaccines, for example, how we were able to bring them to market in less than a year, which was quite a fantastic achievement for the global life sciences community. Is there anything we can learn to sustain that type of global collaboration?
That's a good question, because I think life sciences was always like a global industry, right? So there was always a global collaboration. I was happy that global could also mean more efficient. So I don't have to fly to the US to have this one meeting, or to Asia, but I can do it also in a more efficient way. I think this could spur even more collaboration. I don't have to fly to Australia to profit from the great medtech ecosystem in Victoria. I could do it via video conference. I think this I think is a good news for me. And then of course, if we look at the stories, I think the BioNTech story is a great story also for the entrepreneurial life sciences ecosystem in Europe. That also cool startups and startups that bring value can grow in Europe.
Now, are there any specific areas? I mean, we all heard the war for talent, for example, and this is maybe a question to everyone, right? It's really difficult, especially for the fast-growing ecosystems, to continue to supply the talent that is needed for the successful companies, big and small. Are there any specific programs that you're leading, that you're supporting in order to continue to satisfy that demand?
I can definitely talk to that at what we're doing in Victoria. So we definitely see talent as an issue. And part of that is about encouraging people to transition. So we've done a lot of work in trying to get founders to step up, but we're not talking about the founders. We don't want too many founders in a growing company. You want the people that are going to roll their sleeves up and be happy to be in a variety of different roles. We've been focused on looking at university students, in particular in Australia. We, unlike the ecosystems that you see in Silicon Valley and Boston, where a lot of students go to the universities there because they want a job in a startup, we still have quite a conservative culture around people wanting to go and work for a large pharmaceutical versus an early stage startup. So there's a mind shift that needs to take place. So we've been doing work with that. And likewise, we've been looking at programs for later career people to transition. So whether that's because they specifically lost their job during COVID, which we saw in a lot of industries, including the airline industry, and through to people just opting out of not wanting the corporate grind anymore and wanting to do something a bit more exciting, a bit more innovative. How do you transition people to work in a startup, recognizing that while these more senior people, more experienced people might have the right skill set. They might not have the right cultural fit with the organization. And there is a learning process around getting people to transition from more traditional industries into startups to make sure they understand just the basic principles of lean methodology, what it's like to work in a scrappier organization that may not have that fully fledged HR system or fully fledged finance system, that there are going to be road bumps, and being comfortable with working with uncertainty.
Yeah. That makes sense. And Harry, for you in one of the most advanced ecosystems in the world, have you seen that during COVID, it was more difficult to bring talent into younger, innovative firms, or was it actually an opportunity for more startup creation and for more talent to be joining startups?
Well, I mean, there's always, we're always having a little bit of ebb and flow here. There are people that say, I want to go do something new and take a few people with them, but there's always been a constraint on talent here. And even though we're, technically more advanced, relatively speaking, I think the universities and even the government can do a much better job of promoting, different educational programs and different training programs that would be even more useful. I think sometimes people think, because we have Harvard and MIT and everything else, that it's just naturally going to happen. And, if you don't put your mind to it and set up something specific, it happens, but it just doesn't happen as efficiently as you would ideally like it to happen. I get calls from young people all the time trying to understand, I'm studying this, and what does it mean? What can I do? And I shouldn't necessarily be the one to tell them that. I would hope that there would be programs in the institutions that would broaden their ability to think about what the opportunities are that they have in front of them. And so I think that if even a city like Boston had better developed programs, that we could even have more than we have today.
Absolutely. I see that we're about to run out of time, and I wonder if there are any specific statements, last points that you want to share with our audience. We have policymakers, innovation policy leaders from over 100 countries joining today, so it's an amazing opportunity to share any of the lessons learned or any of the insights that you brought to today's call. Is there anything that you would like to share, perhaps, Kate? Any last words from your side?
I think from our perspective, in a young ecosystem, it's about getting the balance right and knowing when you need to press the increase founder button, when you need to press the get more early stage capital button, and when talent is an issue. And we're starting to see talent be a permanent issue, which is I think a good thing, in as much as it's a sign that we've matured. But you don't want to be encouraging too many founders to come to market if you haven't got that early stage capital really functioning efficiently. And if you've got too much early stage capital, you're going to be investing in some pretty shoddy founders, which is not going to support the sector. So it's been able to really delicately sort of fine-tune your ecosystem to grow it in the way that you want to, and hopefully we're getting the mix right here in Victoria.
Absolutely. Christoph, Harry, any other statements from your side before we wrap it up?
Maybe one thing I wanted maybe to stress is that is my experience in developing the startup ecosystem here in Basel, and I think that it's particularly in the biotech and pharmaceutical space. I think it's always good to not only look at the startup ecosystem, but in the end, you will need these big companies with you, right? They need to be, or they could be, one of the investors. In many cases, they are in the end the ones who bring it to market. And I think, at least in the life sciences space, I would argue that a good ecosystem is not only a startup ecosystem, but it's broader, and it also has the big companies as a crucial part of this ecosystem with them.
Absolutely agreed. Harry, any last words from your side?
Yeah, I would say that there's such an opportunity where you're seeing a combination of technology and biology that we're going to see a whole new wave of startups in those spaces, and that, having the capital to be able to support them to get off the ground, but then also to grow, is going to be critical. But I would also encourage policymakers to start thinking about policy before certain things happen. It's, we've historically always made policy after something has happened. And based on what I'm seeing from a technological shift, you always want you almost want to put policies in place before they happen so they don't run away from you. So
it's a very ambitious objective, but definitely the right mindset to be in. Thank you so much, Harry. Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you so much, Christoph. Very insightful session. I hope the audience enjoyed the session as much as I did. I just want to remind everyone that we're launching the Global Startup Ecosystem Report Life Sciences Edition today, and highly recommend you going online to startupgenome.com to check it out. Thank you so much, everyone.